Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about exporting channels in order to help with Photoshop later on in Vray. So this is the scene we've set up from in Vray from before, and I'm just going to go ahead and open up our asset editor. We've got a couple materials in here just for everything in our scene. And I have those materials applied and mapped so that they're showing up at the correct scale and everything like that. Okay, so if we go ahead and do a test render and see what our scene looks like here, and without letting it render too long, I'm just going to stop the render and save it out. So when I go up to this save icon up at the top of my render window, I can click and hold to get to. I have the option to save the current channel, and I have the option to save all image channels as separate files. If I click on the all image channels as separate files, I can also look over here on the left-hand side where it says RGB color. I have two channels here. One of them is RGB, that just means my rendering. And that one, the alpha channel, is what we set up in tandem with our glass so that we could render without a background. So if we save these out, and I'll save both, I'm going to save them as a PNG. Let's call it 1 for now. So you can see that my image that I just saved out here has no background. So that'll make my life easier when I'm photoshopping. And I have this alpha channel as well, which you can see also has no background. The black background's on. So that's really useful to help us kind of organize, figure out our backgrounds and everything like that in Photoshop when we start Compose. But we can actually do more with these channels than just RGB and alpha. So let me show you that. So if I go back to my asset editor here, I can go over to this little icon at the top. It looks like a bunch of layers. I'll click on that. And right here we have a list of all the channels that we can export or create as separate images when we render. So right up here at the top, we have a whole bunch of them that are going to enable us to just be able to select things a little bit easier. One of them that I like to use is just called Render ID. If I click on that guy, and each of them will give you a little description, and we can easily delete them or copy them or whatever we want to do in here in our menu here. So this one, and I'll just render really quick to show you, will create a separate color for each object in the scene without us having to do any work applying those colors. So again, if I go to this drop down when I hit render, go to render ID, you can see that it's applied a unique color to each object. And again, that's something I'll just save out as a separate image when I save my rendering. And that's going to make my life easier when I'm putting that rendering together in Photoshop. I also like to use a channel called, you have to right click it once you have one to make a new one. So I like to use a channel called Material ID Color. And that's a lot like Render ID, except that it will apply an individual color to each material we have in our scene. Now, in order to use this, we actually have to go and apply a separate material ID to each material that we have in our scene. So if I go back over to my material editor here, for example, I have my CMU material. And again, in order to get this option to show up, there's a little button here at the top that kind of looks like a slider. I'll click on that to switch to like advanced. Just opens up a few more options for me here, and you'll see that a material ID section has appeared. and I can either apply a number or a unique color right there. And so I'll do that for each one of these, and you can see they should already have perhaps colors. Okay, and then if we render again, we should now see that we have a unique color applied to each of the materials that are applied in our scene, and that should easily help us select all the objects that are one material at one time when we're putting the image together in Photoshop. And then finally, I want to just talk about a couple others that you can add that are can be quite useful, especially if you're going to do your materials in Photoshop rather than render them. So if we scroll down here, we can actually see these are actually all the layers that, in theory, Vray uses to compose the rendering, the kind of final effect of the rendering. So, like for example, we could export the background separately. We don't have a background set up, but we could, for instance, export reflections as a separate channel, and that will just pick up on materials that have a reflective property, and it'll just show us those reflections. Same is true if we want to pick up refraction and stuff like that. And you can play around with these and see what other things we can get to be exported. So I'll just click on render again here and show you what those look like. And again, they'll just be something that we can export as a separate channel. So for example, here we have our glass has a lot of reflection on it. Concrete has some reflection, our CMUs do. With the refraction, it's only our glass. So they're just separate images that we can use in Photoshop later to kind of get the composition right, have a little more control. And so when you have all the channels set up and kind of looking the way you want, you can go ahead and just click the Save All, and I'll just call it O2, and it automatically names each channel separately, O2 dot whatever, and there's our rendering, there's our reflections, there's our refractions, and the two ID channels that we rendered as well. One of the channels that I really like is the atmosphere channel that's down here. So we can right click and create that one. And that that's something that we can use to kind of illustrate like an atmospheric perspective or a fog effect. Now you'll have to create the channel as well as go back over here to the render settings, my little gear icon. And under my render setup on the right, there's a section called volumetric environment. I'll toggle that to on. There's two types I can play with here. There's aerial perspective and environment fog. And if I'll just toggle on the environment one and hit render. And you can see it'll also change, like the output of your regular rendering. You can kind of use that to create a little bit of atmosphere. Let's see. We should turn this a bit. Okay, let's see. So now if we toggle over. Oh, and it is important. Sometimes you have to restart the rendering. I'm not sure, maybe if you have a better version of Vray, you won't have this issue, but you can see my shadows aren't showing up quite right. So Just hit stop and load it. Here we go. So yeah, sometimes when you play with those settings, you'll have to restart the rendering. And now if we go to atmosphere, and sometimes you can also get some effect by messing with the camera there. A little brighter. And there you start to get some interesting kind of effects from how the lighting is kind of intersecting with the environment. You can see obviously our main channel is a little bit overblown there, but we can sort of render these separately if we need to. And so you can just kind of tweak those settings to get them where you want. Oh, you see, so that messed up my shadows again. But it's a cool channel to have as well in Photoshop to get some of those kind of atmospheric effects. Like we're seeing there. So that's another separate channel that you could then render as a separate image and take it into Photoshop. This I'm going to save all the channels out from this rendering, and if you go to the Photoshop composition tutorial, we'll talk about how to kind of put these layers together in Photoshop. To the end of this video.